There are certain moments in your life that are supposed to feel like proof. Proof that the years of sacrifice meant something. Proof that the sleepless nights, the ramen dinners, the choosing to study instead of show up at every family gathering actually added up to something real. Signing your first major architectural contract is supposed to be one of those moments. Mine happened on a Tuesday afternoon in March, in a glass-walled conference room on the 14th floor of a building I had helped design the interior renovation for. The senior partners shook my hand. The client smiled. Someone popped a small bottle of champagne that tasted like overpriced sparkling water, and I laughed at the right moments and said the right things. And when I finally walked back to my desk, I sat down, looked out at the city below, and felt the specific, hollowing quiet of celebrating something enormous completely alone. I had texted my dad that morning. "Just a heads up. Big meeting today, might be the one." He replied 3 hours later with a thumbs up emoji. My older brother didn't reply at all. My mom sent a prayer hands, and my younger sister, the one who had needed me to co-sign her car loan 8 months earlier, the one I had driven 4 hours to help move into her new apartment, the one I had lent money to twice without being asked twice. She sent a gif of a cartoon balloon. I sat with that for a moment, then I put my phone face down and went back to work. That was a Tuesday. By Friday, everything had changed, not because of the contract, because of what I found when I got home that evening. A certified letter sitting on my doormat, addressed to me in handwriting I didn't recognize, with a return address from a law firm in Portland, Oregon. I had never been to Portland. I didn't know anyone there. I stood in the hallway of my apartment, still holding my work bag, staring at the envelope for a long moment before I opened it. The letter was from an attorney named Gerald Whitmore. It was formal, measured, the kind of language that exists specifically to deliver large information in small emotional doses. But even through the careful legal phrasing, the meaning was clear enough. A man named Raymond Osei had passed away 6 weeks earlier. Raymond Osei had been a structural engineer. He had worked for 31 years before retiring to Portland, and in his last will and testament, finalized 14 months before his death, he had left a significant portion of his estate, including a paid-off property in Charlotte, North Carolina, and a brokerage account with a balance that made me sit down on the floor of my hallway. To me, I read it 3 times. Then I read it a 4th time because I was certain I had misunderstood something. Raymond Osei. I had to say the name out loud before it settled into the right place in my memory. And then it did, and I felt something move through my chest that I still don't have a clean word for. Raymond Osei had been my drafting instructor at a community college summer program the summer I turned 16. I had taken the course because it was free and air-conditioned, and my mom wanted me out of the house. I had not expected to care about it, but Raymond had a way of teaching that made you feel like you were being let in on something. Like the ability to look at a blank space and see a structure that didn't exist yet was a kind of language most people never learned to speak. He talked about buildings the way other people talk about music. I took every elective he offered for the next 2 summers. When I got into architecture school, he was the first person I called. When I was failing my 2nd year structural systems course and ready to transfer out, he talked me off that ledge over a 2-hour phone call. When I landed my first firm job, he sent a card with a handwritten note that I still have in a folder in my desk drawer. We had stayed in touch, not every week, not even every month, but consistently in the way that actually means something. Birthday texts, the occasional email when one of us reads something interesting, a lunch when I passed through the Pacific Northwest 3 years ago for a conference. He had seemed healthy then. He had seemed exactly like himself. I had not known he was sick. I had not known he had died. That was its own grief, arriving 6 weeks late, sitting in my chest alongside the shock of everything else. I called Gerald Whitmore's office the next morning and left a message. Then I sat in my kitchen drinking coffee and looking at nothing, trying to piece together the size of what had just happened. Raymond had no children. He had been married once, briefly, decades ago. He had a sister in Atlanta whom he had mentioned occasionally, always with a careful neutrality that told me the relationship was complicated. What I could not figure out was how my family found out. I had told no one. I had not called my dad or my brother or my mom or my sister. I had not posted anything. I had not even texted my closest friend Marcus yet, because I was still processing it myself. The letter had arrived on a Friday evening. By Sunday morning, I had told exactly 0 people, which made it genuinely confusing when my brother called me at 9:47 on Sunday and opened with, "So, when were you going to tell us?" I said, "Tell you what?" There was a pause on his end that lasted just long enough to tell me he hadn't expected that response. "About the inheritance," he said. I set my coffee down very carefully. "How do you know about that?" Another pause. "Mom talked to someone." "Who did Mom talk to?" "I don't know, some guy called the house. Old number, the landline. Asked if she was related to you. She said yes." He mentioned Raymond Osei. Gerald Whitmore's office had the landline. I had listed it as a secondary contact on some paperwork from years ago, an old application for a professional association that I had never updated. I made a mental note to address that, but that was a secondary problem. The primary problem was currently on the phone with me saying, "You should have told us, man. That's family business." I want to be precise about what happened in me when I heard those words, because it matters. It wasn't anger. It wasn't even surprise. It was something closer to recognition. The specific, exhausted recognition of a pattern I had been watching my entire life finally showing up in its clearest form yet. My brother, who had not answered a single text message about my contract signing on Tuesday. My brother, who had missed my college graduation because he had a fishing trip planned and apparently rescheduling wasn't an option. My brother, who when I had needed someone to help me move into my first apartment after school had told me he was busy, and then posted photos from a barbecue that same afternoon. That brother was now calling to tell me that an inheritance left to me by a man he had never met, a man who had invested years of mentorship and genuine care into my life, was family business. "I'll call you later," I said, and hung up. My phone rang 4 more times before noon. My mom, my dad, my brother again, then my sister, who started the voicemail she left with, "We're not trying to make this weird," and then proceeded to make it very weird by suggesting that Raymond had probably intended for the money to benefit the whole family and that a conversation would be nice. I did not call any of them back. On Monday morning, I spoke with Gerald Whitmore, who was straightforward and methodical and answered every question I had with a clarity I appreciated. Raymond had been deliberate. The will was updated 14 months before his death, which meant this wasn't a deathbed decision made in some foggy last hour. He had thought about it. He had made a choice. Gerald walked me through the next steps with the kind of patience that told me he'd done this many times and understood that the person on the other side of these conversations was almost always sitting inside a complicated mixture of emotions. Before we hung up, I asked him about the landline call. Gerald apologized. The firm had a policy, he said, of attempting to notify illicit next of kin as a courtesy when the estate included a surviving beneficiary. It was a standard practice not required but intended to reduce conflict. In this case, he acknowledged, it had done the opposite. He flagged it internally. I told him I appreciated that, and I meant it. I also quietly found a different attorney, a local one recommended by a colleague, to represent my interests going forward, not because I distrusted Gerald, but because I had learned, in the years since architecture school, that protecting something you've been given is not paranoia. It's just sense. My family's calls kept coming. I let most of them go to voicemail. The ones I listened to were instructive in the way uncomfortable things sometimes are. My dad's message was measured, almost strategic. He talked about how Raymond, as a family friend, would have wanted to see the blessing shared. He used the word blessing 3 times. My dad had never met Raymond. He did not know Raymond's last name until that weekend. My mom's message was sadder, which almost made it harder to hear. She talked about hard times. She mentioned a few things that were true. The years had been tight, there had been real struggles, mixed in with the few things that flattened my role in those years into something much smaller than it had been. I had helped. I had helped a lot, actually. I had helped quietly, without asking for acknowledgement, because that's what you do. But standing in my kitchen listening to a voicemail that seemed to have forgotten all of that in favor of a framing where I was the one who needed to be reminded of obligation, that one sat with me for a while. My sister's messages evolved over the week. The first one was gentle. The second was more direct. The third, sent on a Wednesday evening, included a phrase I won't repeat in full but that ended with, "And Raymond would be disappointed in who you're becoming." My sister had met Raymond exactly once, at a dinner I had brought her to 8 years ago. She had spent most of it on her phone. I still hadn't responded to anyone. My colleague Marcus, the one person I had actually told, came by my apartment on Wednesday night with takeout and the particular quality of listening that makes someone genuinely good to have in your corner. He didn't offer opinions unless I asked. He just let me talk through it. All of it. The grief for Raymond that kept catching me off guard. The surreal quality of watching people who had coasted at the edge of my life suddenly accelerate toward its center. "What do you want to do?" he asked at one point. It was a simple question, but sitting with it, I realized I hadn't been asking myself that. I had been asking myself what I was supposed to do, what was fair, what would keep the peace, what would make me seem like the reasonable one. What did I actually want? I wanted to honor what Raymond had done. I wanted to make something meaningful out of what he had chosen to leave behind. I wanted to take the property in Charlotte and actually use it. There was an idea I had been carrying for 2 years, a small architecture and design mentorship program for high school students, the kind of thing that had changed my life at 16, the kind of thing that barely existed in the communities, where kids who looked like me were actually growing up. That was what I wanted. My family called it selfish, not in those words at first, but eventually in those words. There was a Sunday phone call about 2 weeks after the letter arrived that I had agreed to take because I thought maybe we could land somewhere honest. My dad was on. My mom was on. My brother got on partway through. My sister was there from the beginning. They talked about family obligation. They talked about how Raymond, as someone who had come into my life through family connections, he had come into my life through a community program I found in a flyer at the library, but I let that go, would have understood the importance of community. They talked about how I had always had a tendency to separate myself. That one was said by my brother, the person who had once told me my going to architecture school was probably a phase. I let them talk. I had learned something in the years of watching buildings go up about the value of waiting until the structure is fully visible before you decide what to do with it. So I waited. And when the room went quiet enough, I said, clearly and without heat, "Raymond left this to me. He knew my family existed. He chose me specifically. I'm going to honor that choice." The silence on the other end was the loudest thing I'd heard in a long time. My dad said something about not understanding. My mom said something about being hurt. My brother said that I was making a mistake. My sister said nothing, which was actually the most honest response of the four. I told them I loved them. I meant it, imperfectly and with complicated feelings, the way love in families like mine often has to exist. And then I said goodbye and set the phone down and stood in my window for a long time, looking out at the city. The program launched 8 months later. I called it the Osei Studio, which Daryl told me Raymond's sister in Atlanta initially resisted, but eventually came around to after I sent her a long letter explaining who I was and what Raymond had been to me and what I intended to build. She wrote back a month later. Her name was Claudette. She sent a photo of Raymond from the early 90s, standing in front of a drafting table, looking exactly the way I remembered him. She said he had talked about me. She said he had told her once that the students who came from hard places and still found their way to the work were the ones worth everything. I printed that email and put it in the folder with his card. The first cohort of the Osei Studio was 11 students, ages 15 to 17, most of them from neighborhoods in Charlotte that didn't have much in the way of design or architecture programs. We met on Saturdays in the building I had repurposed from the property Raymond left me, a modest 2-story space that took 4 months of evenings and weekends and a lot of favors from colleagues to get right. Marcus helped with the electrical. A structural engineer I had worked with came in twice to talk to the students about load-bearing walls. On the first Saturday, I stood in front of 11 teenagers and told them the same thing Raymond had once told me, that a blank space isn't empty. It's just waiting for someone who knows how to look at it. One of the kids in the front row, a 15-year-old named Darius who had come in looking like he would rather be anywhere else, wrote it down in a notebook. I saw him do it. I had to look away for a second. My family and I don't speak much now, not because of a dramatic final confrontation, not because anyone threw anything or said anything that couldn't be walked back. It happened gradually, the way distance usually does when you stop being willing to pretend that the shape of a relationship is something other than what it actually is. My mom and I text occasionally. My dad sends forwarded news articles sometimes, which I think is his version of staying in touch. My brother and I haven't spoken in about 7 months. My sister sent a message in December that was kind and a little wistful, and didn't mention Raymond or money, and I wrote back and told her I hoped she was well, because I did. There are people in my life now who were not there 5 years ago. Marcus, who is the kind of person that makes you reconsider what you thought you knew about friendship? Claudette, who emails every few weeks and has become something unexpected and valuable. 3 of the students from the first or say cohort, who went on to apply for architecture programs and check in sometimes to tell me how it's going. And the particular quality of my own company which took a long time to trust, but which I have come to find genuinely good. Raymond's left me something I didn't expect and couldn't have planned for. But the thing he actually left me, the thing that mattered, wasn't the property or the account balance or any of it. It was the evidence that someone had watched me become who I was becoming and decided that was worth something. That I was worth something, not for what I could provide or co-sign or contribute to someone else's situation, but just for who I was and what I was building. I think about that a lot, especially on Saturdays when I'm standing in that building and watching 11 kids learn to look at a blank space and start to see what might belong there. Raymond knew I'd figure out what to do with it. He was right.